Hello everyone, let's program some point and click. First, let's start by walking through a system diagram of the scripts we'll be writing and how everything works together, at least in terms of this video. We'll start with making a script called Interactables Manager. It keeps a list of transform positions at various points on our screen. Then we'll write a script called Cursor Controller, which goes through the list and measures if the mouse is close to anything. Let's say the mouse is close to a position we've set for our wizard. Cursor Controller will change the cursor to a hand. Then when the player clicks, we'll check if the game object has a script that implements IInteractable. If so, we'll call onClickAction on the script. OnClickAction is the implementation of the IInteractable interface. That means the muffin, grandma, or wizard can all do something different on a click. Maybe a bunch of things happen when we click on a wizard, and maybe we're not quite sure yet what the story should be. And in that case, and really in every case, we want to make it easy to add things, like music or irritable salamanders. Therefore, we'll just have our Interactable Wizard invoke an event. And here's an example event, onClick Wizard Ponders Orb. All kinds of things out there are subscribed to this event and respond to it in different ways. The wizard ponders, the orb sparkles, the music manager plays some music, and the newt browses LinkedIn. In the next video, we'll look at cramming this kind of stuff into Unity's timeline. Okay, let's get started with the Interactable Manager. I have spheres in my scene, and the sphere graphics are really just a visual for positions. The system I want to show you for this, we're not going to use physics raycast. We're sending the spheres from world to screen space, where we can check the distance of their position to the position of the mouse. We can use the Unity timeline activation tracks to enable and disable these objects, and that makes it really easy to keep track of what exactly is interactive in each branch of the story out of play mode. If you're following along in your own scene, make two game objects, one called Cursor Controller and another called Interactables Manager. And then, as children of Interactables Manager, make some Unity primitive spheres. And with your eye on the camera view, put them on everything you want to be clickable. Since we're just using their position, disable the colliders on them. And go ahead and give them each a name. I'm calling mine Interactable Thing, Interactable Skeleton, Wizard, etc. Also, create an unlit material of an obvious color and drop them on the spheres so it's clear what they are. Make a script called Interactables Manager, and drop it on your Interactables Manager game object in your scene. I'll talk through this top stuff in a moment, but first, on start, we'll need the main camera. And then we run a method that loops through all the children's spheres we just made and runs world to screen point on them. Our cursor will be giving us screen point position info, so this way we can determine what's within interactable range. Also, just so we can see the darn things, I'm increasing the scale by 100. What that means is that the spheres will now be 100 pixels in size in a screen space camera. We're just using the Vector 3 info, we aren't using these in the world, so the scale doesn't really matter, and you may want to turn the renderer off on the spheres when you've finished your diorama. Scrolling back to the top, the Interactables Manager keeps a list of every interactable transform. The list is a property that can be accessed with a getAccessor, only get and not set because we don't want other things to set or modify this list directly. You'll see in a moment that our cursor script will go through this list. What the player can click on, what's on this list? Well, that's a topic. First up, you'll need to add the system assembly library at the top to be able to use actions, which are basically events. It's best for the manager to be like, look, I don't care what you are or what you're doing, but if you want to be added to this list, just use these public static actions/events and pass along your transform as a parameter. I'll be listening for the events and I'll take it from there. You do your thing, I'll do mine. On awake, the manager subscribes methods to the events. The methods simply add or remove the incoming transform from the list of interactables. All right, done. So make another script called the Cursor Controller and put it on the Cursor Controller game object. Our Cursor Controller is going to look through the list of transforms and figure out what's within distance to be clicked on. Let's use Unity's new input system. Bring up your package manager, go to the Unity registry and download that. And then in project settings and player, in active input handling, you can have new or both, like I have. Right-click in your project folder, go to Create and select Input Actions. Let's see, I think it's at the bottom, yep. And then I'll call this Interactive Diorama Cursor Controls. You've probably noticed I'm adding Dungeon to the name so I don't get conflicts with what I've already made. Then up in the inspector, click Generate C# Class and click Apply, and then click Edit Asset, which will bring up the input mapping window. There you can make a new action map and call it mouse. call the new action click. You can expand that. And then in binding, the path should be mouse and left button. Then make a new action, and let's call this one position. Make the action type pass through with control type vector2, and then in binding, go to path and into mouse and position. Okay, I think everything is in order here. Just make sure to generate the C# class and click apply. And oh yeah, we need to save this. Okay, with all that in order, we can start working on the cursor controller script. In the cursor controller script, we want the controls that we set up, and we want the Interactables Manager because we do need to get that list of interactables. We have a texture 2D for the mouse hand when it's near the interactable transforms that can be clicked on, and we should get the cursor for setting the texture to it. Next up, transforms for a new selection and the current selection, and some public static actions for making the cursor default or making the cursor interactive. This is going to be useful later on when, in the case of the lifeguard, we're making a choice whether she yells shark or talks to the hunk, and the cursor should be normal when it is off those buttons, but have the hand, interactive hand, when it's over the buttons. So we're making it so that things can change the mouse texture with these events. Next up, we have a public float for the distance threshold for how close the cursor needs to be to the transforms to be able to call on-click action. All right, so we create an instance of our cursor controls. We subscribe to the mouse click started and mouse click performed events. We'll take a look at those methods below, and we subscribe to the events we're setting up so that other things can switch up the cursor. On enable and disable, we want to enable and disable the controls. Then an update, we're trying to find whether the mouse is close to an interactable. We'll set new selection to null and then cycle through all the interactables that are in the list. And then we're using square magnitude as a fast way to tell whether we are within the distance threshold of one of the transforms. We subtract the mouse position from the selection transform position, and then use square magnitude, which just multiplies each vector by itself, x times x plus y times plus z times z. Just think of them like the sides of a triangle in the Pythagorean theorem. We can compare the hypotenuse squared against our distance threshold squared. Some people say that mobile processors are still slow when doing square roots. Honestly, the best performance would come from just doing this once every 10 frames or something. I have a little commented out debug log here with distance check using vector3.distance, so not using square magnitude. When we find a transform under the distance threshold, we save the transform at that index. We call interactive cursor to change the cursor to a hand or magnifying glass, whatever, and then we break out of the loop because there's no need to keep going through it. Here, we save the current selection to figure out if the new selection is something new. Every time find interactable runs, new selectable transform is set to null. So if we've exited the range of an interactable, new selection will still be null, that is, not equal to whatever we had our mouse over. We can set our current selection to null and then run default cursor so our cursor goes back to the default arrow. Here is interactive cursor and default cursor. These are also set up to listen for events in case something else here wants to change the cursor. Started click and ended click are subscribed to our mouse events. Started click is empty now, but I kept it because maybe we'd want to do something with it. On ended click is where we run on-click interactable. If new selection is null, we don't do anything. You know, for like if the player is just clicking on things in the scene that aren't interactable. If there is a new selection, we get the component that implements the interface IInteractable and run on-click action. And then we set new selection transform to null, which is one part of making the cursor go back to default and making it so we can't click on this again. It doesn't matter what the object is or what on-click action does, on-click can be called. The interface script is called iDiorama Interactable, and it's a public interface interactable that defines on-click action, which will need to be implemented. So make a new script and copy this. All right, let's do a little bit of organization here. And I'll just make a folder called scripts. And drop in everything we've done so far. And then here's that interactable script. And then I'll just leave these two things out. Let's check out the cursor controller because the cursor controller, we need our Interactables Manager. And we also need an interactive cursor texture. So I just have a little hand right here, which has the texture type cursor, and the max size is 32. You can click apply. There's, of course, all sorts of little textures out there you can use. Okay, and that goes into the interactive cursor texture. Our default will just be the regular default. New selection transform is, we're just looking at this so we can see what we are close to that we can interact with. So we're not setting it here. And then the distance threshold, maybe we could just do if we're within 60 pixels for now. On the Interactables Manager, we don't need to add anything to this list because every object is going to call that event for the manager to add things. Let's walk through that right now. What do I have? I have a Coffin and a Wizard. I will do the Wizard. So right click, create C# script. And like I said, I want to give these the interactable name, Interactable Wizard. And this script goes on the actual blue sphere selection object. So I'll do that. And then we don't want the collider. So actually, I'll just go and remove that. Okay, Interactable Wizard. Let's start by implementing our IInteractable Interface. And we get a little error there that says Interactable Wizard does not implement interface member IInteractable on click action. So let's press Alt and Enter and implement the interface. This gives us on click action. So we can delete this. And then I'm going to delete start and update because I would rather use void on enable. That way we could use the timeline. And let's invoke the event that the manager gives us. So Interactables Manager dot add to Interactables event. And you can do invoke here. And then we want to send the transform along. The Interactables Manager is going to need this for the list because that's what our list is, a list of transforms. And then we can do void on disable, Interactables Manager, remove from Interactables, invoke, transform. Okay, and then on click action, let's go ahead and do debug.log. And I don't know, what should the wizard or grandma do when you click on it? Maybe we can do, you clicked on the wizard. All right, then let's save that. Okay, so then I'm going to press play off screen here. Interactable Wizard throws an error. What error do you throw? This is happening because our wizard wakes up before the Interactables Manager, and so it's invoking an object that doesn't exist yet. So what we can do is you can just disable this, because eventually we're going to be doing this with the timeline. So you can set this to inactive, and then press play, and of course all the spheres go to the world space, including the transform here, so it doesn't matter that it's inactive. And then we can turn on, actually let's turn on the wizard, the Interactable Wizard sphere transform. And then let's check the Interactables Manager because, yep, our events are working. The Interactable Wizard transform is on the list. So that means with our mouse, yep, and now we can click. And we clicked on the wizard. Awesome. All right, so since you've come this far, let's just do something simple and cute. Let's make the skeleton in the coffin pop up and say, hey, dude. And then he does like a flip and says, $20 to continue, player. So let's do a new script and call it Interactable Coffin Skeleton. Okay, and then on the interactable sphere thing, I will turn off the sphere collider, or rather get rid of it, and then drop in the interactable Coffin skeleton script. Okay, and then just like before, let's do IInteractable, and then Alt-Enter to implement the interface. And then let's just change these to on enable, and then let's do on disable. And then let's do our manager. We can just type manager. Interactables Manager dot add to Interactables event. And we actually don't need to do invoke. We can just do it like that. Interactables Manager, remove. Okay, great. Now on click action. You could have this object control the skeleton, but I don't know. I wonder if that's maybe having this script do too much. And maybe these interactable scripts should just fire events that something's been clicked on. So I'm going to do using system, which will give us the ability to create actions. And then I'll do public static action. And let's do, what should this be called? Or maybe you can call it on Coffin skeleton greeting, or you could call it on click. Yeah, it might be good to do on click for this, so it's obvious where what the event is coming from. And then on click action, all we want to do is on click Coffin skeleton greeting dot invoke. And then we need to find the Coffin skeleton. So I'll do a search for skeleton. There she is. Let's rename her to Coffin skeleton. And then I'll drag her out of this so she can go under another game object that we'll call story game objects that will just have, moving dynamic things, not just scene objects. Let's do that. And so we have our Coffin skeleton, and then let's make a script called Coffin skeleton. Drop the Coffin skeleton script onto the Coffin skeleton, and then double click to open it up. And then here's where we can subscribe a method to the event. The event is interactable Coffin skeleton. So that interactable name is helpful because then you can quickly find everything. Interactable Coffin skeleton. And then it's on click Coffin skeleton greeting. And then we want to subscribe a method to this event. And that method will be skeleton says, hey. And we don't have that method yet. So let's just do, all right. And there we are. So now when we click on the interactable Coffin skeleton, we have the Coffin skeleton actually doing something in the scene. And just to do something simple, let's just do, I have doTween installed, so dg.tweening, and then here we can just do doMove. Do I have to do transform.doMove y? So let's just have the skeleton go up into the world for, maybe that's too much. Let's just do 2. The skeleton will levitate out of the coffin. Okay, let's just try this and see if it works. Oh, but wait, we're going to run into that issue again with our interactable Coffin skeleton script where it tries to add itself to the list, but the Interactables Manager is not there yet. So let's change this to start, and let's see if it's able to invoke the Interactables Manager add to Interactables event. So the Interactables Manager event should already be created by the time that we're in start. Let's check it. Okay, we can see that the interactable Coffin added itself to the Interactable Manager list. Later when we do the timeline, Interactable Wizard will be enabled at some point when wizards are enabled, and then it will also be added to the list of interactables. And now let's check out if we can make this skeleton rise from the grave. And there we go, it does. And let's just assume he says, hey. How are you doing? I've been worried about you. All right, nicely done. I think you have everything you need here to create a fun little interactive birthday or Valentine's card. In the next video, we'll start working with the Unity timeline to explore some fun storytelling and cinematic possibilities. I'll see you there.